Well, good morning, everyone. I said on Monday that, taking my cue from St. Paul, if we love not, then as Salesians, we are nothing. Today, I dare to propose that as Salesians, if we dream not, we are nothing. For thus says the Lord, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your old ones shall dream dreams, and your young ones see visions. Even on the male and female servants, in those days I will pour out my spirit. Joel is trying to rekindle the people's faith, their faith in God, at a time when they've grown complacent. They're just going about business as normal, unaware of the presence and action of God in their midst. Joel's efforts, fortunately, are successful, and a great famine is avoided. And because of the people's change of heart, God reassures his people that he will pour his spirit upon them, that they might be renewed and able to call upon the Lord in time of need. Well, perhaps now is our time of need, and we need God's Spirit to renew us so that we may learn to dream again and to dream anew. Of course, we all know Don Bosco's dream at the age of 9, a dream that will turn 200 years next year. That seminal dream, in the very essence of the meaning of that word, seminal seed. It's a dream in which there are many seeds of our charism. A dream that reoccurred to Don Bosco in many different manifestations across his life. A dream that he couldn't get out of his mind. I'm sure you're also aware of the often repeated but utterly false suggestion that because of that dream, he immediately and divinely knew how his whole life was going to unfold. Nothing could be further from the truth. It took Don Bosco years to discern the meaning of that dream and how he was to respond to God's call. In fact, it took him literally the rest of his life until in good time he did come to understand. But anyway, let's listen to that dream, and I'd ask those who are assisting here to please come forward. We have some characters. We have the narrator, the old Don Bosco, who is the narrator of this story, and we have a beretta for him. John Papworth, please come and get your beretta. And I think they're just being mic'd up. A beretta for the father.
With gratitude.
And of course, there's the lady of the dream is appearing. And of course, then we have Grandma Zucca, Nonna Zucca, Don Bosco's paternal, and then we have Mama Margaret, and we have the young Johnny, the cheeky little one, and we have we have Joseph and Anthony. Now, can you guess which one is Joseph and which one is Anthony? Of course, Carlos is Joseph and Cirillo is Anthony, of course. So we will let them take over the story.
When I was about 9 years of age, I had a dream that remained deeply impressed on my mind for my whole life. In this dream, I seemed to be near my house in a fairly large yard. A crowd of children were playing there. Some were laughing, some were playing games, and quite a few were swearing. When I heard these evil words, I jumped immediately amongst them and tried to stop them by using my words and my fists. At that moment, a dignified man appeared, a nobly dressed adult. He wore a white cloak, and his face shone so that I could not look at him directly. He called me by name, told me to take charge of these children, and added these words.
You will have to win these friends of yours, not by clothes, but by gentleness and love. Start right away. Teach them the ugliness of sin, the value of virtue.
Confused and frightened, I replied,
I am poor, ignorant child. I can't talk to those youngsters about religion.
At that moment, the kids stopped their fighting, shouting and swearing. They gathered around the man who was speaking. Hardly knowing what I was saying, I asked,
Who are you, honoring me to do this impossible?
Precisely because it seems impossible to you, you must make it possible through obedience and learning.
But where? By what means? How can I become knowledgeable?
I will give you a teacher. Under her guidance, you can become wise. Without her, all wisdom is foolishness.
But who are you that speak like this?
I am the son of the woman whom your mother has taught you to greet 3 times a day.
My mother tells me not to mix with people I don't know. So tell me, what's your name?
Ask my mother what my name is.
At that moment, I saw a beautifully dressed lady appear. She wore a mantle and sparkled all over, so that though covered with bright stars. Seeing from my questions the answers that I was more confused than ever, she beckoned me to approach her. She took me kindly by the hand and said,
Look.
Glancing around, I realised that the youngster had all appeared to run away. A large number of goats, dogs, cats, bears, and other animals had taken their place.
This is the field of your work. Make yourself humble, steadfast and strong. And what you will see happening to these animals in a moment is what you must do for my children.
I looked around again, and where before I had seen wild animals, I now saw gentle lambs. They were all jumping and bleating as if to welcome the man and the lady. At that moment, still dreaming, I began crying. I begged the lady to speak so that I could understand her, because I did not know what all this could mean. She then placed her hand on my head and said,
In good time you will understand everything.
With that, and the noise woke me up, and everything disappeared. I was totally confused. My fists were sore from the punches I had thrown, and my face hurt from those I had received. The memory of the man and the lady and the things said so occupied my mind that I could not get any more sleep that night. I wasted no time in telling all about this dream. I spoke with my brothers, who laughed at the whole thing, and then to my mother and grandmother. Each one gave their own interpretation. My brother Joseph said,
"You are going to become a keeper of goats, sheep, and other animals."
and my mother commented,
Who knows, but you may become a priest.
Anthony merely grunted.
Perhaps you will become a rabbi chief.
But my grandmother, though she could not read or write, knew enough theology and made the final judgment, saying,
Pay no attention to dreams.
I agreed with my grandmother. However, I was unable to cast that dream out of my mind.
Bravo, bravo.
Well done. So you took the place.
Grazie, grazie. Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's just spend a bit of time reflecting on that dream. I'm not going to try and go in, explore all the technical details behind the dream, like, you know, the texts and all that sort of thing. Simply to explore the dream as it's presented by Don Bosco in the Memoirs of the Oratory. And of course, in this story, in the Memoirs of the Oratory, Don Bosco is both the author and the narrator. And he's an older man looking back. The memoirs are written over a period of years, 1873 to 1875, at a time when Don Bosco was looking back and reflecting upon all that had happened, and also looking forward. How was he going to convey his spirit to his ever-widening set of enterprises? As we reflect upon the dream, we need to recall Don Bosco's purpose in writing the memoirs. And he outlines this in the preface. He says, "As a father who delights to speak of his exploits to his dear children, in the hope that they will draw from these adventures some spiritual and temporal advantage. He draws us into his confidence, for he hopes that the memoirs will help overcome problems that may come up in the future by learning from the past." And in this is the sense, I guess, in which Father Stella calls the memoirs of the future, as much as the memoirs of the past. Don Bosco's recalling and reflecting upon his experience, and also teaching us about his deepest and most heartfelt understanding of the Salesian spirit. It's important to remember that in the memoirs of the Oratory, that they are the memoirs of the Oratory, not the memoirs of Don Bosco. The Oratory is in fact the central character, and the main focus is the Oratory rather than Don Bosco himself. As author, Don Bosco is particularly conscious, almost self-conscious, that he's in the story. But the real story is not about him, it's God's intervention to bring about the Oratory. So in this sense, the memoirs are not only a description of the origin and the gradual development of the Oratory under God's guidance and the direct influence of Our Lady, they're also a masterclass in pastoral theology, pedagogy and spirituality in a story or narrative form. And this is the key we'll use to explore the dream. So one of the first things we notice about the dream, of course, that it's set in a familiar, rustic, domestic setting. It's near his home. It's a place where the old Don Bosco is very comfortable because it's where he grew up. And there's a crowd of children around. Of course, a crowd of children playing around the Becky wouldn't be an unusual thing. There's laughing and games. There's play and there's fun. And there's also swearing. Virtue and sin we hear in the next scene. John's response is interesting. He's so enraged by these evil words that he jumps in immediately and tries to stop what's going on with his fists and his words. What an impetuous, impulsive lad. Don Bosco is actually revealing something of his own youthful character. Hot-headed, prone to fits of temper. Only with time did he learn the emotional self-regulation that would eventually be so integral to his character. Another example, I guess, of addressing the negative by attending to the positive. Young John, though, is also determined, a doer. He shows initiative. He's not going to be one to stand by. He's going to throw himself into the situation. Character traits that we observe in the older Don Bosco throughout his life, even to his final years. Of course, Don Bosco's a clever author. He builds in numerous biblical allusions, and they're scattered throughout the narrative. At that moment, a dignified man appeared, a nobly dressed adult. He wore a white cloak and his face shone so that I couldn't look directly at him. That reminds me of the Transfiguration. Jesus took with him Peter, James and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before him. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. John is confused and frightened, just as the disciples are terrified upon hearing the voice from heaven. The man calls John by name. The prophets were called by name. The apostles are called by name. He's commissioned, take charge of these children. There's a real sense in which Don Bosco, who is both author and narrator, is imbuing the story with a tone of the divine, a divine call, a divine mission. Because in the 1870s, looking back, he sees the Lord's hand in all that's happened across the decades. And he wants us to know, even when he's gone, that we should trust in God as he learned to trust in God. In fact, trust in God is one of the key themes throughout the whole of the memoirs. The man gives John a mission. Teach them the ugliness of sin and the value of virtue. And this is exactly what we see playing out across Don Bosco's whole life. He's continually protecting his youngsters against all that is negative and harmful, and promoting positive experiences. That's the dynamic of the preventive system. Impeding all that is detrimental to human and spiritual development and offering positive opportunities for growth and flourishing. That continues to be our mission, our ongoing mission in whatever Salesian context we find ourselves. Preventing the ugliness of sin and promoting the value and the beauty of virtue. And so there's a mission And there's also a method. Win these friends of yours not by blows, but by gentleness and love. This pedagogy of kindness is, of course, the hallmark, the defining characteristic of our shared Salesian charism. In reflecting upon Don Bosco's dream, Father Ewan MacDonald, the Irish Salesian provincial, notes that the dream points to two fundamental and indispensable elements of our Salesian spirit. The mission is to the young, especially to the poor and abandoned. And the charism is responding to them with gentleness and loving kindness. He takes a bold further step. He identifies gentleness and loving kindness as the defining, distinctive, and characteristically Salesian charism. He writes, St. Teresa of Avila identified determination as the charism needed for her Carmelites if they were to be trailblazers in contemplative prayer understood as friendship with Christ. St. Ignatius of Loyola, recovering from illness, gleaned the wisdom of discernment of spirits. The Salesian charism, originating in the heart of the Father, came into being through the creative prompting of the Spirit who moved St. Francis de Sales and St. John Bosco to live the gentleness and loving kindness of Jesus. We'll return to this tomorrow. As we continue exploring the dream, let's note young John's reactions to the incredible and overwhelming scene in which he finds himself. Confused and frightened, I replied that I was a poor, ignorant child. I was not able to talk to these youngsters about religion. Hardly knowing what I was doing, I said, "Who are you ordering me to do the impossible?" Wow. Not only impulsive, but also an impertinent lad. You can just imagine him. The artistic representation in that cartoon life of Don Bosco, I don't think really do justice to the scene. It's a very placid, plain, but this is an impertinent lad. He's going to have his hands on his, "Who are you?" And this is revealing something, I think, of the real young Johnny. Impertinent, impulsive, possibly disrespectful and obstinate as well. Even though he's confused and frightened, possibly because he's confused and frightened, he isn't fearful of questioning the man's authority. Perhaps it's a defensive reaction. The man's response is interesting. He remains calm, direct, and authoritative, without a hint of aggression or frustration at having been spoken to so disrespectfully by this impertinent lad. I was quite amazed at Moss, because if that had been a young Samoan lad, he would have lost his head. The dream continues. You must make it possible through obedience and learning. Two virtues that were precious to Don Bosco and very much at the heart of his administrative style. Just think about how young John at the age of 9 over the next, 15 years or so, would study. He would study his heart out. Every opportunity he got. Diligently going and systematically going about his studies. Years later, Don Bosco, already settled in at Valdocco, would take a day off a week to go back to the convitto to read and study and write. So this learning is something that continues in his life. He sent Rua and Caliero to the university to get degrees. Learning is something that Don Bosco valued very, very deeply. Perhaps in a sense he understood what St. Francis de Sales meant by study is the eighth sacrament for a priest. And we know how important the virtue of obedience was for Don Bosco. Don Bosco was very demanding when it came to obedience, whether it's the boys or his Salesians. And yet, we see through the memoirs how obedient he was to Don Cafasso. He asked Dominic Savio to make himself but a handkerchief in his hands. That's exactly what he did. He made himself a handkerchief in the hands of Don Cafasso. Don Bosco's obedience and learning. Going back to the dream. Interestingly, it appears that the man's very presence causes the fighting, the shouting, and the swearing to cease. Are these lads curious about this stranger? Or do they already know him? Are they simply intrigued by such a person in their midst? Why are they so drawn to the man, the dignified man, that they change their behaviour and gather around? Naturally, we know that for Don Bosco, the presence of Jesus in one's life changes everything. That's the mission to which he ended up devoting his whole life. And we see more than a hint of it here. And then, of course, there is that magnificent line, I will give you a teacher. Under her guidance, you can become wise. Without her, all wisdom is foolishness. The Marian dimension of our Salesian character, our Salesian charism is so beautifully expressed here. Mother, teacher, guide, source of wisdom. For Don Bosco, the natural companion to complete and absolute trust in God is complete and absolute confidence in the help of Mary, whom he learned to love at the lap of Mama Margaret. Again, interestingly, although we intuitively know that the characters he encounters in the dream are Jesus and Mary, they are never explicitly named. They know who John is, he's called by name. But he never gets an answer as to who they are. Even Moses got an answer. To who are you, O God? What is your name? But young John doesn't. Perhaps it's a literary device to add to the dramatic tension. Perhaps, as author, Don Bosco doesn't want to be too presumptuous. Perhaps it's nothing. When the woman does appear, she is of stately appearance, wearing a mantle that sparkled all over as though covered with bright stars. Maybe my imagination is a little bit overactive. But that seems to me reminiscent of the woman in Revelations. There appeared a great sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. That being said, she is characterized as attentive, kind, understanding. as she takes the boy by the hand affectionately. There's an implied intimacy. The woman is utilising, modelling the gentleness and love that the man has already recommended. And very soon we will see the fruits of that loving kindness. But first, there's a change of scene. The youngsters haven't changed from youngsters into wild animals. Rather, they appear to have run away and been replaced by the wild animals. I think that's an important detail because it's too easy to unquestionably equate the wild animals with young people. How often do we do that, and how often is that an assumption that society makes? And yet, it can give rise to quite unfortunate assumptions about the nature of young people when we know, in fact, that they, like all of us, are created in the image and likeness of God, loved and beloved of God. I mention this even though we know that some of the kids Don Bosco encountered and worked with were a bit rough. More than a bit rough. Many were certainly looked down by the local Turinese establishments and feared as troublemakers, oftentimes because they were migrant kids from far off villages who didn't even speak the local language. However, what's really important is the transformation that will follow. The lady instructs John to look, to observe what will become the field of his mission. What you see happening to these wild animals, you must do for my children. When John looks around, where there had been wild animals, there are now gentle lambs. In this case, the wild animals haven't run away. Rather, there's an implicit assumption that they've been transformed. The mission, our mission, is transformative. The method is transformative. For Don Bosco, being and living oratory is a transformative experience. It protects and nourishes. It leads to joyful play, lambs jumping and bleating. It leads to welcoming Jesus and Mary. For me, the really important thing here is the transformative impact of our Salesian spirit, lived with trust in the goodness of God and the help of Mary. I need to return to the advice that the lady gives to young John. Make yourself humble, strong, and energetic. Umile, forte e robusto. Ian Murdoch of happy memory was persistent in advocating that robusto should be translated into English as persevering. And there's a certain sense in this suggestion. In English, robust, amongst its many other meanings, can be understood as resilient and being able to withstand and overcome adverse conditions. And that's certainly something that John, as a boy, as a young man, as a young priest, as an older priest, all the way through his lifetime, he would have to withstand and overcome adverse conditions. Persevering also offers a wholeness to this trilogy of personal qualities that the lady encourages young John to cultivate. Humility is a spiritual virtue. Strength refers to the body, and perseverance is a psychological character strength. Body, mind, and spirit, strong, resilient, and humble. There's a symmetry and a wholeness to that. Interestingly, in an early draft of the dream story, the text reads salute, health, rather than umile, humility. But it's scratched out, and Don Bosco writes umile. Humility was an important virtue for Don Bosco because, as the memoirs show, he considered pride as a persistent personal failing, which he deliberately strove to overcome by cultivating humility. An interesting example of healing a personal wound by deliberately cultivating the opposite virtue, as we spoke about, reflected upon the other day in reference to John of the Cross and St. Francis de Sales. In good time, you will understand everything. Despite the lady's kindness and her explanation, young John remains confused and unable to understand. But his defensiveness and aggression gives way, and he crumbles almost. He begins to cry. The lady resists offering a further explanation. Rather, she offers a gesture of kindness. Then she placed her hand upon my head, and words of comfort. In good time, you will understand everything. As any good parent or educator knows, sometimes there's no way of offering a full explanation or giving complete consolation. The ambiguity and uncertainty persists, and you just have to remain present with the youngster as they sit with the ambiguity, the unknown, and the vagueness. It would seem to me that once again, the lady of the dream is presented as a model of the preventive system in action. Well, the next morning, John is anxious to convey his experiences to his family. And there's understandably different responses from each member of the family, more or less corresponding to how their characters are portrayed across the memoirs of the oratory. The old reminiscing Don Bosco concurs with his grandmother. Pay no attention to dreams. Sorry, I can't do it as well as you, Silvana. Pay no attention to dreams. And yet, Don Bosco was unable to cast that dream out of his mind. As a boy, as a young man, as an adult, he was unable to cast that dream from his mind. The dream is the dream of a child. Yet it's an older, more mature Don Bosco who was recording and interpreting it as he reflects upon his life, upon his infant yet growing congregation, upon all that has been achieved and the challenges that lie ahead, including after he is gone. It's clear that he understands that the gift of the Salesian charism has its origin in that boyhood dream. Yes, Don Bosco was convinced that the seed of our Salesian charism was divinely implanted in his heart as a child. That seed, planted in the deep recesses of his being, germinates and grows slowly over time, but will blossom and bear fruit after encountering and overcoming many difficulties. So why spend so much time on the dream? Well, I guess it's one of our foundation stories, as much as Don Bosco's encounter with Bartholomew Gorelli or Mickey Magoni or any of those other classical stories that we know. It's a storm that looms large in our charismatic imagination and contains so many seeds for us to take and sow, and hopefully to reap a rich and personal and pastoral harvest over time. Some time ago, I watched a gritty Spanish drama called Hit. I don't know if any of you have seen it on SBS. It's a group of out-of-control students in a difficult secondary school. And there's a whole lot of hip-hop music woven into the drama. And the lyric of one particular song struck me. I can live without cash, not without dreams. Those students had all experienced trauma, loss, and grief. They felt hopeless regarding their circumstances, and so they contrived to sabotage any and every intervention aimed at empowering them to take responsibility for their lives. They couldn't see the future because they couldn't dream. They'd lost hope because they couldn't dream. It's the same with us. If we forget to dream, if we stop dreaming or find ourselves unable to dream, the charism will wither within us, will become lost, will lose hope. Our charism is born of a dream, and that dreaming is instinctive to our Salesian identity. If you want to rob a Salesian of their identity, remove their ability to dream. Our dreams are where we discern our way forward. Our dreams are where we imagine a different, more evangelical reality. Our dreams are where we encounter God and God's people. Our dreams are where we envision a world with the eyes and the heart of God. Our dreams allow us to be grateful for and to learn from the past, to reevaluate our present, to look forward to the future with hope because of our trust in God and the help of Mary, our mother, our teacher, our guide, our wisdom. As Robert Greenleaf, the founder of the modern servant leadership movement, once commented, not much happens without a dream. And for something great to happen, there must be a great dream. Behind every great achievement is a dreamer of great dreams. Much more than a dreamer is required to bring it to reality, but the dream must be there first. While his dream profoundly inspired Don Bosco throughout his life, he was much more than a wistful dreamer. He was a pragmatic realist and a man of dynamic action. He discerned how to give life to his childhood dream as he encountered the real world of the young on the streets, in the factories, on the building sites of Turin in the early 1840s, during a time of social, political and religious turmoil. By means of prayer, observation, encounter, study, spiritual direction, and trial and error, he developed a methodology, a pedagogy, a pastoral practice, a spirituality to which the young people of his time responded, which was pastorally fruitful and which resonated with the deepest movements of his own heart, including his own dreaming. As Pope Francis reminded the Salesians of Don Bosco in his message to GC28, the Salesian oratory and everything that arose from it came about as a response to the life of the young with a face and a history. This set a young priest in motion who was incapable of remaining neutral or unmoved by what he saw happening before him. I think we can say that the oratory emerges exactly at that point where dreaming and reality collide. However, back to the dream. It was the dream that came first. That dream Don Bosco understood as a divine calling, and he responded with determination and compassion to the real-life situation of the young he encountered. His ongoing work among the young gave rise to other dreams: textbooks, oratories, classrooms, workshops, the Salesians of Don Bosco, the Salesian sisters, a church, another church, Catholic readings, the cooperators, the Salesian bulletin, the boarding schools, the foreign mission, a basilica in Rome. Across his life, Don Bosco continued to give fuller and bolder concrete expression to that original dream. Reflecting upon Don Bosco's memoirs of the oratory, Ian Murdoch gives some prominence to young John's use of acrobatics, juggling and magic tricks. He applies this idea as a metaphor to the original dream of Don Bosco as the author. Ian writes, "One of the conjuring tricks that Don Bosco plays on us in the memoirs of the oratory is to tell the dream of his boyhood in such a way that it fades, melts and dissolves from Turin with its slums and streets and squares, from Chieri with its churches and very pretty provincial market town appearance, to Becky, to open fields and countryside, and a little house, the place of the dream. For me, the setting of the dream in Becky places it in a unique cultural, geographical and historical context, but it also gives scope as to where the dream might be lived out. The Becky is both specific enough and non-specific enough. It would seem that the dream cannot be contained to one particular context. Just as it came to life in Valdocco, so it also came to life in Mirabello, moved out of Italy to Nice, crossed the Atlantic to Buenos Aires, found its way to Asia, the Antipodes, and into the Pacific. Don Bosco's dream is a dream that crosses the borders of time, geography, and culture. Yes, for us Salesians, dreaming is part of our charismatic DNA. Without dreaming, we aren't fully who God calls us to be. St. Francis de Sales encourages us, be who you are and be that well. As Salesians, we can only fully be who we're supposed to be if we continue dreaming. In 2015, Father Angel shared his dreams for what might be the fruits of the celebration of the bicentenary of Don Bosco's birth. Speaking specifically in relation to SDBs, he dreamed of a congregation of happy Salesians, with men filled with faith in God, of Salesians filled with passion for the young, the poorest, of real evangelizers and educators in the faith, a congregation that was always missionary. The idea of the dream recurs quite frequently in Father Angel's writings, and interestingly, we know he's chosen it as the theme for the 2024 Strenna. Pope Francis concluded his message to the general chapter by inviting us to dream and dream big. Dream and get others to dream. The Rector Major, in his closing address to GC 28, dreamt of something incredible and presented it as a challenge. At first it may sound shocking, but let it sink in. I dream, he said, that today saying Salesians of Don Bosco means consecrated crazies. Consecrated crazies. That is, Salesians who love with a true Salesian heart and who are perhaps even a little crazy, oriented towards the poorest. Yes, if we are to be true to our charismatic identity, we must be dreamers and dream big as Pope Francis invites us, and get others to dream. And perhaps even to dream not only big dreams, but also crazy dreams. And perhaps that's something we can continue reflecting on tomorrow. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son,